Well, good afternoon, all in this webinar on parallel optimization. As you can see, the PowerPoint presentation is ready. Short introduction, my name is Jan Veerman and my colleague Jurgen Maas is also attending this webinar. I will do a short introduction on our organization and on an introduction on the 4 blocks files that we created. So in the parallel optimization part, the second part of this overview, I will do a short recap of the 4 blocks. And the most interesting part for you probably will be the demo, which will be done by my colleague Jurgen. And afterwards, we have a short couple of minutes for feedback and questions. So if you have any questions, please use the Q&A panel in between, because this is such a short webinar. We want to postpone all the questions until the end and capture then all the questions and give the answers at that moment. About Planetime, the main question for people that we want to answer by the slide is why Planetime, why us? What do we bring to the table, as you can see? We are a group of planning consultants and experts with 15 to 20 years of experience for each person. So really competent in the 4 major industries that we're working on and working in. We are a no-nonsense company, so we like to tell you straight up forward what you can expect from us. But also during a project, if anything goes wrong, and that's also the third point here, we are quite transparent in what we think you should do. We listen to you, but also we bring the bad news as soon as possible as we encounter it. During implementations, we do as much knowledge transfer as your organization can handle. And for example, in the implementation of Pigment, we want to make sure that at the end of a project, which has a start and an end date, we can go home and leave it in your hands. So you can do the day-to-day maintenance yourself as a company. And there's no need for us to support you in that one. The only thing where you can add additional support, if, for example, is when you have questions that your own support team cannot cover or handle, or for major implementations, enhancements to the existing models, for example. And last topic here is state-of-the-art solutions. So we've deliberately chosen Pigment software because we think that is the best planning solutions out there. Very flexible, very open to any use case, and truly supports connected planning. So that's why you have to choose us if you want to do a serious implementation in this area. And our area is indeed the integrated business planning. For people who do not know what integrated business planning is, it's based on 3 major parts in the supply chain area. So the first part is demand, where sales needs to collect the sales signal. On shorthand, that could be, for example, your orders, but it needs to have a forecast for longer periods out there, so the future. Supply needs to translate that demand signal into a production scheme. So based on what sales thinks their customers are going to buy, they need to make a plan to produce it in time and make it available in the right place. And also connected is finance, because in some cases, for example, allocations, you have a request of 100, but you can only make 80. How are we going to allocate? And that could be on financial parameters like margin, for example. So we allocate those 80 to the highest profitable customers in our case. But it could also mean for product introductions and promotions that you have the financial KPIs ready to make the informed decisions. So in this triangle, in demand, supply, and finance, that is our expertise field. The value that we do bring to the table. First of all, we do improve your bottom line result. So after we're done, you should see an increase in your margin. And we do that by aligning your planning process, make sure that everyone talks to each other within your organization and there is a common planning arranged and agreed upon. Optimized inventories, it could mean that you could lower your inventory levels, or it could mean that you need to step up in your inventory levels according SLAs, for examples. But in the end, what we always see is that the sales increases, costs reduce, and also very important in these agile times, that you are able to proactively plan instead of reactively. Instead of reacting to what happens to the events in your world, you start to be able to be more proactive and run scenarios to bring the future into the now and see what the impact would be if, for example, your workforce declines with 10%. And that whole planning process and implementation after we're done should be done with less effort. So freeing up valuable resources to do more valuable stuff in your organization. Going back to the 4 blogs that we created and posted the last 4 weeks on LinkedIn, where the topic was based on parallel optimization versus sequential optimization. I come from an area where sequential optimization was, the only way to do it. So first you had to optimize your processes and then start to implement your tooling. In the old days, there's a nice picture in this overview where we did see that processes were very complex and started to become more complex over time. Those processes were not well documented, or documentation was really out of date. A lot of people said, we've done it for years. Why change? Why the hurry? It's running fine. That's on the process side. On the tooling side, the planning systems, we see that those planning systems, nowadays it's cloud-based. In those days, it was client-server, so you had to install them. But those systems were quite big to install, but also to set up and maintain. So large systems, expensive systems, but also complex systems. So that meant that if you want to update those systems, you were highly dependent on consultants. It could be external consultants as well as internal workforce that you had to maintain it. Change requests were very cumbersome to implement, so it took long to implement. It took long for IT, for example, to get started, but also were quite expensive. And there were also times where we told the customers to update their planning process because what they actually wanted to have was not, the tool was not capable of supporting it. Now, those days have changed, and we now see that instead of sequential optimization, we can do parallel optimization. Parallel means, and you can see that in the picture to the right, that so the left is sequential. So first you do A, once that's done, you go to B, once that's done, you go to C. In parallel, you can say, okay, we do A, B, and C, and we start them at the same time, and we interact with those 3 processes, A, B, and C, and make sure that anything that changes is reflected in all the other processes as well. So parallel means you're much more quicker to implement and to adjust, and we need that speed nowadays. And for example, with cloud-based planning tools, we always mention to start small and then expand once the first implementation is done, expand the functionality and the scope and connect with other areas of planning within your organization. If you do it in the parallel way, you get very short feedback loops. So you implement, users see it and start to work with it. Once they see how it's working, they provide you feedback. And then you can adjust according their requirements. So your update frequency becomes much, much higher compared, for example, to the sequential part. And this enables an environment where you're much more agile and flexible to do corrective actions based on what happens in your planning, based on outside events. For example, a virus that comes up and has a huge impact on your supply chain, for example. That also has to do with, or is supported by the cloud-based planning tool. So we made a deliberate decision to go for Pigment, because the first time when I saw a demo of Pigment, I was really flabbergasted with the functionality of the platform, but also with the flexibility of the tools. So that supports the way that we can now implement it in a parallel way. So if you ask a user, in the end, what he wants to get from a new system, he does not have the right reference environment. So he will create requirements based on what he knows, and that's probably an old planning system or Excel and the current way of working. So he is not capable of looking into the future based on, for example, new functionality which is available in a new planning tool. So for them, it's difficult to come up with the 100% accurate functionality upfront. So we say, okay, let's get started, implement the first use cases, use it, and then we decide based on new requirements what we are going to implement based on priority settings and when. And it's also very easy to, for example, in the development phase, we decide to go for path A, and halfway we decide, this is not the right way to go forward. So we go back to the initial starting phase and then start to go down path B. Very easy, very quick to update. And like I already mentioned, if you ask a user now what he wants to have from a new system, he has a wrong reference base. He knows what he knows, but he does not know what he cannot foresee in the future and what he does not know. So that's difficult for him to translate that. And that's why we say start to use it and generate new change requests based on the use of the system. And that's why we say the implementation of a tool and the update of the planning processes can be done in parallel. And that's the ideal combination where we think the tooling and the technology and processes come together nowadays. That's in short my introduction, and indeed, the proof is in the eating of the pudding, and that's why we are going to do a short demo of Pigment. My colleague here, a short introduction there on Pigment. We believe that it is planning 3.0. So the first professional planning tools like Cognos Planning, Hyperion Planning, for example, which we believed was planning 1.0. Then the first cloud-based planning tools, for example, like Anaplan came out, which we think was a huge step forward in user acceptability, user friendliness, and flexibility. It's planning 2.0, but with Pigment, we now see there's even a much, much more flexible platform out there, which we call now planning 3.0. Just to give you an overview, we're handling a case where it's a manufacturer of drones. It has production locations worldwide and also sales worldwide. The planning is now done in Excel, more difficult to maintain, and there's no time for scenarios because the time we use now in getting the planning in Excel up to date and ready, the time is, when it's done, we need to implement it. So no time left to do all kinds of nice scenario exercises. And based on that, we will show you how easy it is if you start to implement it in Pigment and start to use it there. So by closing off this use case, I will stop presenting my screen. Or Jurgen, if you can start presenting your screen. Yeah, I will stop it. And if you can start presenting, and I will hand it over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Jan. So let's deep dive directly into the action. Jan already said that we're taking now a use case about the manufacturer of drones. And assume that we're starting with an original Excel file, maybe familiar with a lot of persons that are using it a little bit like this. That you have a pivot overview to analyze your data. You have a couple of tabs where it's more on the flat file, flat list that you can fill in your forecast. You see some information, but it's all quite limited regarding the visual representation. And of course, how this data is populated is based on source data, where you have actuals that are loaded in, forecast that is loaded in, like statistical forecast, budget information, all that kind of stuff. And what you typically see is all that are spread by different Excel files. or it is part of like this in this example, one Excel file that per drone brand you can see the product, you see the category, you can see the customer, and you see a couple of matrices. Like actuals, what are the actuals, which you can ungroup, group, and so on. You see what is my baseline forecast, what is my budget, and if I want to change something with regarding an enrichment. So let's say I want to add here 10, then or change it completely. That it's all formula based that you can see. So it's all formula based, and the maintenance of this is quite difficult, especially if you add a new product, what if you add a new customer, what if their customers suddenly have multiple products over the multiple brands. What you often see is that somehow macros needs to be built, manual exercises or manual lines that needs to be generated, files that needs to be regenerated again. How are you going to deal with history and that kind of stuff? And you see that it's quite difficult. And also, even while I change here the value, you cannot directly see it in your report because it is all separate files, all separate sheets. In order to refresh it, you need to, again, say, for example, refresh all. There is maybe a Power Pivot or Power Query or some macros or some other connections attached to it in order to refresh the data in order to analyze it. So it is quite a cumbersome process in order to see what you're doing, to validate if you're still on track with budget, if you're still on track with your agreements that you have with the customers, or if you're still in line with the trend that you see with your actions. Let's say this is the old way. And so what we have done, we have taken all the master data, actuals, the brands, the categories, the customers, and so on. We take that into Pigment. And when I minimize the screen, what you will see is Pigment. So I'm already logged into Pigment. And what you will see, for the people that are seeing this for the first time, Pigment is a cloud environment solution. So that means in the cloud environment, you log in with your default web browser. In my example, it's Firefox. And there you have potentially multiple models. A model can be for supply chain, can be for demand planning, can be for workload, can be capacity, can be finance, it can be anything. So there is no fixed use case where you can use this platform. And in this example, we are in the model for sales and operation planning. But based on my user access, and you see that's already different than Excel, I have only access to the demand planning boards or my dashboards where I can do the planning. Now what you already see is that instead of different tabs, I have here 5 dashboards where I have access to. And you see it's already completely differently than the Excel file. So if you talk about parallel optimization, you can start first, for example, with the sales plan where you only can fill in new numbers. But on a separate track, marketing could already be working there to do their marketing plan, or that marketing wants to have some certain marketing campaigns. Or think about collaboration together with the customer, that the customer can also fill in their forecast or can upload their forecast. But so it means that you don't need to have step A finished before you can go to step B and step C. But it's also for the implementation part. You can also say, we're first going to implement this, but directly in parallel, we're going to also implement the marketing part, or we're going to implement supply chain, or we implement finance. If you compare that with the Excel that I had, and it is already a little bit more extensive. So instead of that, I have a statistical forecast, and I open the board, then I have a statistical forecast that I see on a very flat, only number-based. I can see it already more visually appealing. What you can see is that I have potential different scenarios. So I have a standard scenario. I have maybe a worst case or a best case, especially if your demand manager says, okay, take into consideration that if this customer or this product will be end of life next year, or we have some issues with the customer or delivery issues, give you my worst and best case scenario. You see that I have different cycles. So it gives you also the possibility to store history and to compare those different cycles. Maybe you're working on different business units, so that you can work on business unit A, B, C, but each has his own customers or maybe his own set of forecasts or actuals. And then you have the remaining master data elements or dimensionalities, which you also saw in the Excel files. So we have the regions that we can select. We have the countries selected to the regions that I've selected. So in this case, I can only select Netherlands because that's part of Europe. And then I have a customer. So these are the 3 customers that are linked to the Netherlands within Europe, and those are linked to that specific brand. So all the data points are more connected. So it makes a little bit also more directly visible on the selections that you can do. So in this case, we have selected the customer, Laus en Zonen, with a specific brand, Drone Zone, and a Q100. What you directly see in this case is that it gives me already my overview of, okay, what are my actuals and what are the actuals that are corrected based maybe on outlier detection and that kind of information. But that can be a separate use case in a separate model, or that is responsibility of someone else. But you can review in here, okay, what does that mean for my statistical forecast? How is my statistical forecast generated? And then the next step will be then, okay, this is what I've selected, but you see, if I go to the next dashboard, all my selections are synced across with that. So if I make a selection that I want to have, I can, whatever dashboard I will open, it will take that same selections with me. And so in this case, I have the same selection like Laus en Zonen and the Q100. And what I can see in here is what is my actuals over the last 2 years, but also what is my forecast, statistical forecast for the next year, and what is my sales plan, my final sales plan for the next year. And instead of that, it is one big table where you can see everything. It's more broken down in pieces, easier to analyze, but also to forecast. So in this example, what I can say, okay, I have my statistical forecast and I want to make an enrichment, but the enrichment is not an override, but it's an addition on. So I can say, okay, I want to add here 4 additional things. And you see that also directly coming back in the chart. So directly what you're filling in, it will directly also impact, let's say, the selections that you do. But think about collaboration. You can also think about, okay, that I want to start a conversation in this dashboard. So it is not only saying, okay, I need to send this email, or I need to send an email to someone else to review the numbers or to do something. I can start conversations where I can track and see what is happening based on my data. So it makes it easier to also say, okay, I need to review, I need to have some additional questions for my manager, and I can populate a message directly to him, which him or her can see this directly in Pigment. But talking about the parallel part, while you're working on this, maybe another team, like the marketing team, can start working on the marketing plan. So, and as an example, I populated already 2 marketing campaigns with different start dates, different end dates, different brands, different products. But this campaign, what I'm selecting in here for Europe, you see that I can then select, okay, I want to select these products to my campaign. I can directly then also see, based on the selections that I do, what is my percentage in enrichment that I want to have an additional. But I can also say, okay, I want to add this product. And what it does, okay, that says, okay, my total sales plan for this product is 205 units. And I want to add, let's say, 10%. And what you will see directly that the 10% is that it will also highlight directly what is my total added value from a marketing perspective on my number base for Germany, Netherlands, or other regions that I want to select. Yeah. So it directly shows you already the impact of only the marketing. And while marketing is working on their forecast or their campaigns, doing some things with their campaigns, that can also be a worst case or a best case scenario. So when I go to a best case scenario, you see that everything is empty. There they can maybe say, okay, we don't do 10%, but we are going to enrich it with 20% or do something else. So it allows you also to compare the different scenarios. But while maybe a demand planner is working on a sales plan with all his customers and all his products, a marketing is working on their marketing campaign. Maybe some customers are filling in a forecast. The demand manager can maybe directly go to the consensus demand to say, hey, how is my final forecast is built up? So the person can directly, again, see all the selections that are made, or make a selection, or can even go above aggregated. So a total country or total region. And in this example, what you see is that, okay, I have my actuals over the months, across the years, of course. I see what was my statistical forecast, but now you see some more information. What was my enrichment on sales plan? What was my additional marketing enrichment? And what is then my final consensus demand? So that means also not only from a visual perspective, also from a data perspective, a demand manager or the end responsibility of demand forecast can see directly what is happening here. And what you see also is potentially product enrichment for end of life and MPIs. So it means that maybe a product team is responsible for introducing new products or phase out some products. And that has an impact on your forecast, of course. And also that is what you can see in here, what that the impact will do to that. And in this example, the demand manager can see, okay, how is everything built up? So let's take December of 2023. You see my starting point was 44 units. 4 units was added by the sales planners. 5 units are added by the marketing plan because of the percentage growth that they have forecasted on. Maybe there were some new products. In this case, that is not the case because I don't select any product, of course. But also here I can say, yes, this is not really in line what I was expecting, and I can also override this. So I can also reduce this again to say, I want to remove, let's say, that specific unit to change my consensus demand. So you can easily have all different impacts, parallel planning, while there is in the end also all-in-one end-to-end visibility, and there is one person end responsible for this. Yeah. So it allows you a quite more flexible visualization. So I now selected only one product, but if I deselect this and I say I want to maybe look across all Europe for this specific product, or maybe worldwide for this specific product, you see my data is directly shifting with it. So I see my total forecast and my total data is changing with this. So it gives you a better visibility and end-to-end overview compared if I go back to the Excel file, that I need to, again, refresh this in order to do that. And while I'm working in this file, maybe another person cannot work in this. So that is also another advantage of the cloud-based planning solutions, that you have multi-user planning. Multiple people at the same time can do planning and can enrich and can forecast on that. Yeah. And I think this is a very good example on what the advantages of parallel planning compared to the sequential planning. And I will give it back to you, Jan, for the final part of the presentation.
Yes, Jurgen, thank you for that. Let me share my screen again to go into the Q&A. So full screen, and there we are. And yeah, it's only one slide left. So we're open to feedback and open to questions. We do see a couple of questions come in. Maybe sometime, if you have additional questions, please type them in the chat box. One of the questions asked is, can Pigment support SNOP? Because if you look at their outings, it says IB of FP&A. Correct. They're promoting mainly their planning platform in the FP&A area right now, but we do see that we have the platform is quite flexible to make sure that you can also do IBP related, SNOP related projects. I think that it's one of the best planning platforms out there to support it, even because SNOP is more, how to say it, more from a functional perspective, much more to model than FP&A, which is based on all kinds of regulations, more straightforward. So as SNOP is more difficult to implement, but we've seen now with an implementation of a global brand retailer worldwide that an SNOP implementation can easily be done with the support of the Pigment platform. question on the expected payback period of an IBP implementation. To give you an overview to what we've done for this global brand retailer, we implemented an S&OP model, so it's not really financial, so not a full IBP implementation, but S&OP implementation. We've done that in a throughput time of 4 months. So that means in our case, it was 60 days of implementation by 2 consultants. And so you can take into account based on a fee what the implementation costs for consultancy is plus the licenses. But one of the main reductions that we did see is that instead of a planning cycle of days, we reduced it now to a planning cycle of hours, because it was all interconnected, and there were now much easily see do a change in one of the models, how that impacted the one of the other models. So if you can take out, for example, 3 days in a planning cycle, I think quickly calculation here, but I think the payback time for an SOP implementation is shorter than a year. That's maybe a little bit bold from our side, but we truly believe that tools like this are much easier to implement than those large, maybe point solutions. We all know. Besides the fact that it's easier to implement, so less days, also from a license perspective, Pigment is much, much cheaper than those big systems. Another question, how quickly can it be implemented? I think we already touched that a little bit here, but we've seen implementation of, for example, a demand module, only a demand module, with throughput time of a month. And I think we estimated it for 12 days, and we still have budget left, and it's implemented. So it gives you a rough idea how quickly it can be implemented. But I have to say, it's done by the best people in the field who implemented it. So based on our expertise, we can translate the requirements quite quickly and implement it quite quickly.
And it also depends on that part on the requirements. So if the demand is a very simple model with only, for example, like the sales plan that I just showed, yeah, then it's much quicker than when you have sales plan, marketing plan, collaborations, consensus demand, statistical forecasting, and that kind of stuff. So it also depends. But in this example, where it was only about demand planning on 2 different flows. One is on a kind of commercial flow, and the other more on a product flow, which will be aggregated together. Yeah, that is indeed the numbers of that Jan has mentioned.
Yeah, and that's also what we promote. So do not try to implement it in all Big Bang. Just divide it up into functional areas, and within the functional areas, divide it into use cases and start implementing it. And once one of the functional areas is implemented, we can move on to the next one. Or if you have a bigger team, you can even do that one in parallel. So not only process and tool implementation parallel, but also within the tool implementation itself, you can have parallel tracks. The good thing here, for maybe to reference also based on the questions, is that based on the previous implementation, which we mentioned for this global retailer, we did see that due to the easiness of implementation, we got all kinds of additional requests from the customer to say, but now I see the power of the platform. Can we also start to implement it like this? So in the end, we had quite some nice discussions with this customer to make sure that we really understood them, but also guided them in what was possible. And one of the results, besides the fact that from days, the planning is now in hours, also the plan is now more detailed level than they could cope with in Excel. So also the level of detail which they needed for their planning processes is now also in more detail. So also a nice, I think, example of where process and tool implementation, in this case, enhances, based on the functionality of the platform, enhances the parallel implementation.
I see also another question coming back about sharing the applications. So what about parallel optimization. So in this example, there's a model let's say, example, only demand planning. And the solution of Pigment allows you to share data directly from one model to the other model. So that means that you don't need to hassle around with import, export across the different models. That you need to export it to CSV or to another data source and import that back into the model. In this example, Pigment can say you have a model demand planning, you have a model supply planning, you have a model finance, and those three can all connect to each other from a technical perspective. So then you have real-time, real-life data insights when something is changed in the demand side, that is automatically reflected in the supply side, but also potentially in the finance part. So yes, the integration of that part is especially parallel optimized, let's say.
Yeah. Great. Thank you, Jurgen, for answering that question. Any other questions, feedback? Please use the chat box. If not, then we will want to thank you all for attending. You will get a link with the recording in a few days. So if you have additional questions later on, you can see our email address and my phone number. So please reach out if you have additional questions, if you want to have a more specific demo, or if you have a opportunity within your organization, or if you're a consultant where if you have an opportunity at a customer of yours where you see the potential of this platform based on the pain points that they might have. So any feedback, please, or questions, please reach out to us. I do not see any additional questions come in, so want to thank you all. Enjoy this lovely day. It's still nice weather outside, so thank you for attending besides the nice weather, and see you around. Thank you all. Bye-bye.